January 1940, Kollaa River sector, Finnish Karelia. The forest is silent in a way that only deep winter can create. Snow presses down on spruce branches like a held breath. The temperature sits far below zero. Metal burns the skin. Somewhere beneath a low drift, a man lies motionless. White over white. His breath escapes slowly, packed tight against the frozen ground so it will not rise like smoke. Across the clearing, high in the trees, Soviet sniper positions have gone quiet. Too quiet. One by one, over the past days, they have stopped reporting. No warning shots. No return fire, just stillness where trained eyes once watched the finish lines. Back at headquarters, some officers still dismiss the rumors. An infantryman with an old rifle. No scope. No formal sniper schooling. A peasant soldier, they say. Armed with what looks like a toy compared to Red Army optics. But in the snow ahead, 11 Soviet snipers are already dead. And the war, until now loud and brutal, has begun to fear silence. That silence was not accidental. It was born from the moment the Soviet Union turned its attention toward a small northern nation it believed would fall in weeks. By the autumn of 1939, Europe was already breaking apart. Germany had invaded Poland in September. Britain and France had declared war, yet remained largely still behind their borders. The conflict was global in name, but fragmented in reality. Power blocks were positioning themselves, calculating what could be taken while attention was divided. On August 23, 1939, the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Publicly, it was a non-aggression agreement. Privately, it divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. Finland, small and recently independent, fell squarely into the Soviet sphere. For Moscow, the concern was strategic, not ideological. Leningrad, Soviet Russia's second-largest city, sat barely 30 kilometers from the Finnish border. Soviet planners saw the Finnish frontier as a loaded gun pointed at one of their most vital industrial centers. Any hostile power using Finnish territory could threaten the city within days. In October 1939, the Soviet Union demanded territorial concessions. They wanted parts of the Karelian Isthmus, control over islands in the Gulf of Finland, and a naval base at Hanko. In return, they offered land farther east, sparsely populated, strategically useless. Finland refused. The Finnish government understood what acceptance would mean: the loss of defensible terrain, the surrender of natural barriers, the quiet beginning of occupation by another name. Finland had gained independence only in 1917, and its memory of Russian rule was still raw. Negotiations collapsed. On the morning of November 30, 1939, Soviet artillery opened fire across the border. Red Army formations crossed into Finnish territory at multiple points. Moscow announced that Finland had provoked the conflict. The claim was false, but irrelevant. The invasion had begun. Soviet leadership expected a short war. Intelligence assessments predicted Finnish resistance would collapse within weeks. The Red Army outnumbered Finland by more than 3-1 in manpower. In tanks, aircraft, and artillery, the disparity was overwhelming. Finland mobilized roughly 300,000 men. The Soviet Union committed over 450,000 in the opening phase alone. On paper, it was not a contest. But paper did not account for terrain. Eastern Finland was a nightmare for mechanized armies. Dense forests, frozen lakes, narrow roads, endless white that swallowed movement and sound. Temperatures dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius. Engines failed, weapons jammed. Frostbite crippled soldiers faster than bullets. The Red Army advanced in massed columns trained for maneuver warfare on open ground. Finnish defenders did not meet them head-on. They vanished into the trees. Small units moved on skis, carrying everything they needed on their backs. This was not the war Soviet planners had imagined. And it was in this environment, cold enough to kill, silent enough to erase whole battalions, that individual soldiers began to matter more than divisions. Among them was a corporal from a rural farming village, assigned not to legend, but to survival. As the front stabilized and Soviet commanders sought ways to break the deadlock, a new battlefield emerged within the forest itself, one where patience, stillness, and eyesight would decide who lived. That battlefield would soon belong to the snipers. By December 1939, the Winter War had settled into a brutal rhythm. The Red Army had learned, slowly, that numbers alone could not move through Finland's interior. Soviet columns stalled on forest roads, strung out for kilometers, vulnerable at every bend. When they stopped, they froze. When they pushed forward, they bled. Finnish defenses were thin but flexible. There were no continuous trench lines like those in France. Instead, there were strong points, fallback positions, and vast empty spaces deliberately left undefended. Finnish units did not attempt to hold ground at all costs. They held time. The forests became weapons. Soviet soldiers, many from southern regions, arrived unprepared for Arctic warfare. Winter clothing was insufficient. Camouflage was poor or non-existent. White snow turned dark uniforms into targets visible from hundreds of meters away. Fires meant warmth, but also death, their smoke betraying positions almost instantly. The Red Army relied heavily on snipers to counter this. Soviet doctrine before 1939 had already placed value on marksmen, shaped by lessons from the Russian Civil War and border clashes with Japan. Scoped rifles were issued in increasing numbers. Sniper pairs were trained to dominate open areas, tree lines, and frozen rivers. In theory, they would suppress Finnish movement. In practice, they revealed themselves. A scope reflected light. A muzzle blast disturbed snow. A shot echoed just long enough for a trained ear to fix its origin. In the cold, even breathing could be heard. Finnish soldiers had no romantic view of sniping. It was not a prestige role. It was necessity. Ammunition was limited. Every bullet had to count. Many Finnish marksmen had grown up hunting in forests since childhood. They understood wind, distance, and patience long before the war taught them fear. Among them was Simo Häyhä. Born in 1905, in the Russian border, Häyhä was a farmer by trade. He was small in stature, quiet by temperament, and deeply familiar with the land. Before the war, he competed in marksmanship events with the Finnish Civil Guard. He favored simplicity. Reliability, familiar tools. When mobilization came, Häyhä was assigned to the 6th Company of Infantry Regiment 34, operating in the Kollaa sector. It was one of the coldest fronts of the war. Temperatures plunged beyond minus 30 degrees Celsius. Frostbite was constant, and death often came without warning. Häyhä carried a Finnish-modified Mosin Nagin M2830. No scope, just iron sights. Some officers preferred scoped rifles. Many believed magnification was essential against Soviet snipers. Häyhä disagreed. A scope forced the shooter's head higher. It fogged in the cold. Its glass could glint. Iron sights, lower and simpler, kept the shooter closer to the earth. At first, his methods drew little attention. The Red Army, meanwhile, continued deploying sniper teams into the Kollaa forest. Their mission was clear: eliminate Finnish marksmen, break the psychological stalemate, reopen movement corridors. What they did not realize was that they were walking into a contest they did not fully understand. One fought not with superior equipment, but with absolute stillness. By early January 1940, Finnish patrols began noticing something unusual. Enemy sniper fire was decreasing. Positions once active were silent. Tree stands stood empty. It was not a coincidence. And it was the beginning of a 4-day period that would quietly redefine sniper warfare in frozen forests, one shot at a time. And to understand how that happened, the story must be examined from several angles at once. Human angle. The quiet farmer-soldier Simo Häyhä was not a hero in the traditional sense. He did not seek recognition, medals, or glory. At 29 years old, he was simply a farmer raised in the forests of Karelia, familiar with the rhythm of the seasons and the patience of the hunt. In the snow, he became something else: an observer, a ghost, a force defined by precision and stillness. He spent hours lying motionless, the rifle's cold steel pressed against his cheek, breath barely rising. His eyes scanned for the faintest movement. The frost would form on his eyebrows and eyelashes, yet he did not shift. Soldiers nearby described him as invisible, though they could see his footprints the next day. Each elimination required calm, calculation, and nerves that never trembled. Every shot carried weight, not only the physical consequences, but the psychological one, the knowledge that another Soviet sniper would not return to his unit. This was a war of endurance as much as skill. Hours passed with nothing but snow, wind, and the occasional distant artillery boom. Hunger and cold were constant companions, yet Häyhä's method relied on routine. Position. Wait, observe, fire, withdraw. Repeat. In these routines, the ordinary man became extraordinary. Tactical angle. forests and winter as weapons, Finnish commanders understood the terrain better than the invaders. Open fields, frozen lakes, dense forests, each could be used against the enemy. Small mobile units moved quietly on skis, disappearing into the white expanse. Patrols set traps along predictable Soviet routes. Roads and clearings became kill zones, but only if patience held. Snipers like Häyhä turned natural features into extensions of themselves. Snowdrifts served as camouflage. Fallen logs and dense brush were shields. The silence of the forest amplified the effect. One well-placed shot could immobilize a unit, disrupt coordination, and spread panic. Where? The Soviet forces had numbers, but the Finns had knowledge and invisibility. Each sniper kill was more than elimination. It was a tactical statement, a way to claim control over the battlefield without firing a single salvo of artillery. Technological angle. Iron sights versus Soviet optics. The Soviet snipers had telescopic rifles designed to increase range and precision. In theory, they held the advantage. In practice, the optics betrayed them. Glass surfaces reflected the pale winter sun. Fogged lenses in extreme cold impaired accuracy. Heavy equipment limited mobility and increased visibility. Häyhä's choice of iron sights was deliberate. Simpler, lighter, and more reliable in sub-zero conditions, they allowed him to stay low. Each movement could be measured in millimeters, and the shooter's head remained hidden in snow or foliage. Training and instinct compensated for lack of magnification. At close to mid-range distances, hundreds of meters in the forested battlefield, accuracy mattered more than optics. His tools were modest, but his skill magnified them. Enemy angle, Soviet sniper doctrine, and limitations. The Red Army entered the Winter War confident in their sniper corps. Their doctrine emphasized long-range engagement, observation from elevated positions, and pairing shooters with spotters to maximize efficiency. In training, snipers were taught to dominate open terrain, suppress movement, and control key points. Karelia, however, was not open terrain. Forests were dense, snow-deep, and visibility limited. Soviet snipers struggled to adapt. Their training had not prepared them for extreme cold, which affected trigger mechanisms, stiffened rifles, and fogged scopes. Night and blizzard conditions rendered observation nearly impossible. Moreover, Finnish camouflage made detection almost hopeless. Each sniper sent into the Kollaa forests faced the same invisible threat, a marksman who knew the forest as well as he knew his own breath. Repeatedly, Soviet patrols reported invisible shooters and a phantom fire. Losses mounted, not from mass assault, but from single, unseen men who disappeared into white. Doctrine was insufficient against someone who rejected conventional approaches and trusted instinct over procedure. Leadership angle. Decentralized Finnish command. Finnish leadership embraced a principle unusual for its time: autonomy on the front lines. Commanders trusted small units and even individual soldiers to make decisions based on local conditions. Orders were concise, flexible, and often leave much to judgment. This philosophy empowered men like Häyhä. He did not need explicit permission to select a firing position, stalk targets, or choose when to engage. Local initiative was celebrated. The army recognized that, in forests where communication could fail within minutes, centralized command was a liability. Individual soldiers were instruments of survival and strategy. The result was a force capable of turning the environment itself into a weapon, where a single rifleman could alter enemy movements, disrupt morale, and reshape the battlefield on his own. Moral angle. The invisible conflict sniper warfare in the Winter War was intimate, lethal, and morally isolating. Unlike massed artillery or frontal assaults, each engagement involved direct observation of a human target. The consequences of each shot were undeniable. Yet there was little time for reflection. Waiting in sub-zero temperatures required focus. Hesitation could mean death, either for the sniper or those nearby. Häyhä's actions illustrate a paradox of moral combat. Efficiency and survival demanded detachment, but human awareness remained. Each Soviet sniper felled was a real person trained and sent into the same environment. Finnish soldiers acknowledged this unspoken reality, but the cold demanded clarity. Survival was not glorified, it was absolute. To kill or be killed became an instinct refined over hours, days, and weeks, until skill and patience overshadowed hesitation. January 6, 1940. Kollaa River sector, the forest was alive with snow and silence, yet danger lurked in every shadow. Soviet sniper teams had been dispatched into the Kollaa sector with orders to locate Finnish marksmen and restore control over the frozen front lines. They were confident in their training, rifles gleaming under the pale winter sun. Häyhä had prepared for weeks. His position was chosen carefully, a small depression in the snow, hidden by fallen branches and natural cover, with a clear line of sight to likely enemy paths. He had stocked extra ammunition, ensured his rifle functioned flawlessly in sub-zero temperatures, and dressed in layers of white wool that blended seamlessly with the snow. The first day began quietly. Snowflakes fell like ash. Häyhä lay still, eyes scanning, ears tuned to every sound. A distant twig snapped. He focused, calculated range, adjusted for wind, though nearly still, and squeezed the trigger. The first Soviet sniper collapsed. No one nearby heard it except the shooter. This was only the beginning. Over the next 4 days, the Kollaa forests witnessed a small man operating with surgical precision. Each Soviet sniper who advanced became a target. Patrols that paused in the open were eliminated before they could relay information. The Red Army's initial confidence eroded rapidly. Reports noted unseen shooters and a phantoms in white. Häyhä's method was relentless. He fired carefully, each shot deliberate, then changed position. He avoided patterns, rotated firing points, and used the terrain to obscure movement. Snow and cold were allies. The forest his shield. Even when exposed briefly, he remained invisible, almost a part of the winter itself. The Soviets began to suspect a master sniper was at work, but no one could find him. Teams were sent into overlapping grids, yet Häyhä's knowledge of the terrain allowed him to anticipate movements, vanish before detection, and reappear elsewhere. The psychological impact was profound. Soldiers hesitated to advance, commanding officers grew frustrated, and morale began to fracture. By the 4th day, 11 Soviet snipers had fallen, all attributed to a single marksman in reports from Finnish units. Word of the White Death circulated quietly among Finnish soldiers, a mixture of awe and practical fear for the enemy. The Kollaa sector had transformed. What had been a numerical advantage for the Soviets had become irrelevant. One man, using patience, discipline, and intimate knowledge of the land, had reshaped a section of the battlefield. Yet the danger was far from over. Soviet commanders were adapting, sending larger patrols, probing artillery, and instructing teams to detect hidden shooters at any cost. Häyhä's skill would soon be tested under conditions more perilous than the first 4 days. January 10-13, 1940, the hunt intensifies. The Soviet response was methodical. Reports of missing snipers and invisible threats reached regimental headquarters. Commanders ordered coordinated sweeps, combined sniper-spotter teams, and increased artillery harassment in suspected Finnish positions. They sought to flush the unseen marksmen into open ground. Häyhä anticipated these maneuvers. Each day he rotated positions, sometimes moving only a few dozen meters, other times crossing open snowdrifts under the cover of terrain folds. His camouflage was perfect. Layers of white over white snow packed around his body to erase outlines, and a careful alignment of rifle and helmet to avoid glinting metal. His iron-sighted rifle, trusted over optics, allowed him to stay low and almost invisible. Patrols passed within tens of meters. Some froze mid-step, sensing something, but never found him. Others fell, the sound of a distant shot carrying just long enough for dread to settle. Over these 4 days, Häyhä's efficiency did not waver. Every target was deliberate. No panic, no waste. 11 enemy snipers were eliminated, a staggering number for any forested battlefield in such a short period. The psychological effect on the Red Army was severe. Units slowed, movements became cautious, and commanders feared even the smallest flanking parties. The forest, once a neutral environment, now belonged to the Finns, controlled not by artillery, armor, or numbers, but by a single rifleman and his discipline. Soviet attempts to adapt, smoke screens, decoy positions, masked movements were met with patience and adaptability. Häyhä fired, retreated, and blended into the snow, always a step ahead. Within the Finnish lines, admiration and silent recognition spread. Soldiers spoke of a man who did not celebrate, did not boast, yet whose actions had tangible consequences on the battlefield. Morale lifted. Confidence grew. If one man could make the enemy hesitant, then perhaps the forest was not only a place of survival, but also of opportunity. By the end of the 4 days, the toll was clear. The Soviets had lost 11 trained snipers to one unseen opponent. Entire units adjusted strategies simply to avoid exposure. The front lines remained frozen, but the balance had shifted. The story of one quiet farmer, lying motionless in the snow, would become a legend whispered among soldiers, a symbol of the lethal power of patience, knowledge, and precision. The Winter War would continue for weeks, but this moment, 4 days in January, 11 snipers gone, illustrated the human element that no army, no matter how vast, could fully anticipate. The immediate aftermath of those 4 days in the Kollaa sector was felt both physically and psychologically. On the battlefield, the Soviets had lost 11 trained snipers, men specifically tasked with suppressing Finnish movement and protecting advancing columns. Each loss was significant. Snipers were rare, highly trained, and difficult to replace, particularly in an ongoing campaign where attrition was already high. Soviet reports acknowledged that some units hesitated to advance, unsure whether unseen shooters awaited them behind every tree and snowdrift. For the Finnish defenders, the effect was profound. Morale, strained under months of cold and scarcity, received a boost from the tangible results of one man's skill. Stories of the White Death circulated quietly among infantry units. Soldiers recognized that, while victory remained uncertain, the forest offered them more than concealment, it offered leverage. A single soldier, carefully positioned and patient, could shape engagements that might otherwise have required entire companies. Tactically, the encounter forced immediate adjustments in Soviet operations. Sniper teams were now paired with more spotters, moved with additional infantry cover, and rotated more frequently to prevent predictable exposure. Artillery fire was occasionally used to flush suspected positions, though this was a blunt instrument, often revealing nothing. The Red Army began to understand that conventional doctrine, reliant on numbers and optics, was insufficient in forests dominated by terrain, weather, and individual skill. The psychological dimension was as critical as the physical. Reports from Soviet command noted soldiers experiencing a fear of the unseen. The morale impact extended beyond the immediate area. Word of invisible shooters reduced aggression and delayed assaults. Entire patrols moved with caution, altering routes and timing. The forest had become a place of paranoia for the invaders. Häyhä himself remained anonymous within official operations. He did not seek recognition, and his superiors noted only that certain patrols returned unscathed or that enemy fire had mysteriously declined. In many ways, this invisibility enhanced his effectiveness. The absence of fame allowed him to operate without distraction, refining methods that would later define sniper doctrine. Beyond the Kollaa sector, the Winter War continued with intense fighting. Finnish troops, relying on terrain, camouflage, and tactical innovation, consistently disrupted larger Soviet forces. Individual actions, like those of Häyhä, combined to produce a defensive strategy that amplified effectiveness despite inferior numbers. While the Soviet Union would eventually regroup and reorganize, the lessons from those early days of January 1940 had already reshaped how both sides approached sniper warfare, stealth operations, and psychological leverage in forested terrain. In the weeks that followed, Häyhä continued operating in the Kollaa sector, maintaining his lethal efficiency. Soviet units remained wary, adapting patrol patterns, increasing reconnaissance, and attempting ambushes to neutralize the invisible threat. Yet despite these measures, the fundamental advantage of a highly skilled marksman in familiar terrain, each action reinforced a simple truth. Individual skill, combined with patience and intimate knowledge of the environment, could shape outcomes even against vastly superior numbers. Häyhä's feats had a ripple effect beyond immediate battlefield results. Finnish morale surged. Soldiers recognized that survival, and occasionally victory, depended not only on collective formations, but on individual initiative. The psychological impact on both sides cannot be overstated. Soviet snipers, once confident in their training, now feared forests they had assumed would be easy to dominate. Finnish troops gained a sense of agency, knowing that even one man could decisively influence the front lines. In February 1940, Häyhä would be severely wounded by an explosive bullet, ending his frontline service. He survived, though with permanent facial injuries, and would later be credited with over 500 confirmed kills during the Winter War, though the exact number remains debated by historians. What is certain is that his actions in early January, 11 enemy snipers neutralized in 4 days, became a defining symbol of Finnish resistance, the triumph of skill, discipline, and determination over sheer force. Strategically, the Winter War forced the Soviet Union to reconsider tactics in forested and cold environments. Sniper operations were recalibrated, artillery coordination became more cautious, and reconnaissance was intensified. These lessons carried forward into later conflicts, influencing Soviet approaches in World War II and shaping global perceptions of sniper efficacy. For the Finnish army, individual acts like Häyhä's reinforced the effectiveness of decentralized command, adaptive tactics, and environmental mastery. While the war eventually ended with Finland ceding some territory under the Moscow Peace Treaty of March 1940, the defenders had preserved national independence and inflicted disproportionate losses on the Red Army. The Winter War became a study in asymmetric warfare, where terrain, weather, and individual skill offset overwhelming numbers. In the quiet forests of Karelia, the snow remembered nothing, but history would remember the marksman whose patience and precision turned a small sector of the front into a zone where one man could decide the fate of many. The story of the Kollaa forests in January 1940 is a lesson in the power of discipline, patience, and human skill. Simo Häyhä's 4 days of unmatched precision were more than a tally of enemy snipers. They were a demonstration of how knowledge, preparation, and resolve could transform an ordinary man into a decisive force on the battlefield. In war, technology often takes center stage. Tanks, aircraft, and artillery dominate strategy discussions. Yet here, in the snow and silence of Karelia, the simplest tool, a rifle with iron sights, proved more potent than scopes, numbers, or doctrine. The environment itself became a weapon when mastered, the forest a partner rather than a challenge. There is also a moral and philosophical dimension. Häyhä's feats remind us that warfare is intensely personal. Behind every kill is a human life. Behind every calculation is a heartbeat. Behind every silent weight is tension and fear. Yet, in the extreme circumstances of survival, clarity replaces hesitation. The quiet efficiency of one man shaped the psychology of thousands, altering the course of local operations and leaving an enduring mark on military history. History remembers the White Death not only for the numbers but for what they signify, the extraordinary potential of focus, courage, and intimate knowledge of one's environment. In the end, the snow-covered forests of Karelia were silent witnesses, keeping no record of fear or courage, but for those who survived, and for the world who later studied it, the lessons remain clear. The Winter War, though overshadowed by the greater conflicts of World War II, showcased the enduring truth that even in the most modernized armies, human skill and determination can tilt the scales. One man, a simple farmer with a rifle, became the embodiment of that principle, forever a reminder that in war, as in life, precision and patience often speak louder than numbers or weapons.